Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy and governance. I am Rabiu Tukur. As Nigeria faces a severe hunger crisis occasioned by insecurity, climate change and the effects of removal of subsidy on fuel and floating of the naira, the federal government has just rolled out a quick policy action to address food insecurity and stabilize the economy. Tagged Accelerated Stabilization and Advancement Plan. The federal government package is expected to be implemented within 180 days as a stopgap measure to tackle the rampaging hunger and rising food prices, getting out of the reach of millions of Nigerians. Now, under the new policy, the government opted for a 5-month duty-free import window for maize, rice, wheat, among others, in addition to expanding land cultivation in partnership with states while importing 250,000 tons of maize and 250 metric tons of wheat. Now, the policy strategy of the federal government is coming amidst soaring number of food insecure Nigerians grappling with devastating hunger and malnutrition. Now, it is against this backdrop that we will be engaging with an economic policy analyst, Rabiu Tukur Hassan, to examine the prospects or otherwise of the policy option. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me on this program.
And before we commence the conversation, here are some tidbits. Now, the House of Representatives has rejected Samoa Agreement, asking the federal government to suspend implementation until all controversial clauses are spelled out. This followed the adoption of a motion of urgent public importance by Rep. Aliyu Sanimadaki, NMPP Kano, and 80 others at the plenary on Tuesday. Madaki had drawn attention to the clause highlighting gender equality, saying it is a Trojan horse which could violate the morals of the country. In his contribution, the House Minority Leader, Rep. Kingsley Chinda, PDP Rivers, said the parliament was not carried along in the process of signing the agreement, which has generated controversy. Now take a look.
Further worried that the signing of such an agreement with the aforementioned clauses, if true, violate our sovereignty and is a clear contravention of Section 12(1) of 99 Constitution as amended.
Where the federal government is going into an agreement, by the provisions of Section 12 of the Constitution, the Parliament ought to be carried along. And if the Parliament had been carried along, these arguments, even from our people that we speak for, would not have been there, because Nigerians would have been better informed. The problem is that of lack of information. And as a parliament, all we are saying is that we want to be satisfied that what the executive has told Nigerians is actually the true position of the facts.
In fact, 3 ministers have come out, including information, budget and planning, in public to say there was nothing like that in the agreement. Go and Google your media. You will see the agreement, you will see it there. That it was never mentioned, it was never discussed. There is nothing like lesbian rights or gay rights. It is about human rights, environmental protection, and trade agreements, period.
The first amendment, Mr. Speaker, is the need for Nigerian government to unsign and withdraw from the unpopular Samoa Agreement, and the need for the government to refrain from engaging in any such treaties that contravene the people's culture, religion, and unethical morals.
Now, President Bola Tinubu has created the Ministry of Livestock Development. The ministry creation was announced during the inauguration of the Renewed Hope Livestock Reform Implementation Committee established to address the issue of farmers' hardest crisis. Present at the inauguration were the Vice President Kashim Shettima, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation George Akume, the Chief of Staff to the President Femi Gbajabiamila, amongst other cabinet members. Here is a video clip from the inauguration session.
Why should Nigeria continue conflict of the caliber of people that is here? This presents a unique opportunity also to delineate and establish a separate ministry called the Ministry of Livestock Development. We develop the economy, give people opportunity to excel. Our vet doctors can give us the necessary protection and opportunity to rear more, breed, crossbreeding, and stop the wanton killing even animal feeds. It's a huge economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I hereby inaugurate the Renew Hope Livestock Reform Implementation Committee in Nigeria. It is now in your hands. We're ready to work for the success of this program and the first success of the entire nation. So we will leave a Nigerian flag without stain to our children. Thank you very much.
We will now take a short break, and when we return, our conversation commences. Stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us. As I said earlier, we have in the studio Rabiu Tukur Hassan, an economic policy analyst. Together, we'll be looking at the issues very closely. Welcome once again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, let's start with the tidbits. Let's start with the first one.
Yeah.
At least the House of Representatives has finally, reacted to the report which was taken by the Daily Trust regarding this Samoa deal, the controversial Samoa deal. Now, the House of Representatives has rejected, the deal and asked the federal government to hold its implementation until the controversial clauses are clearly spelled out. What do you make up with the resolution by the House of Reps?
Yeah. Good evening. The resolution of the House, especially in this case, actually came at a very, very important time when the controversy had begun to stretch nerves, amongst our community, in the media, and the general populace. However somebody sees Nigeria, there are certain principles about life, about culture, about religion, and about the way we do our things, which we believe politicians of whatever persuasion or coloration should consider before taking any action that will affect the life of Nigerians. And I think, given the dimension of the rejection, especially given that it was mostly led by parties in opposition in the chamber, seems to create an impression where Nigerians can see that those in the oppositions are more sensitive to the yearnings of Nigerians as against the centrist, the ruling party adherents in the National Assembly. I have not yet come across any views from the opposition party that seems to from the ruling party that seems to be underlying the fact that sensitivity and sensibilities of Nigerians should be an important factor in determination of whatever policy or whatever law or the adoption of whatever convention that you have, that Nigeria should look at. I think it's a very important development in our politics, and that it's well deserved.
The position of the majority leader seems to have reinforced the concerns by Nigerians. He said that the National Assembly was not carried along, in the whole arrangement. They are also seeing it as Nigerians are saying it. Ordinarily, looking at the sensibility, if you like, or sensitivity of the issue, the National Assembly ought to have been involved, but they were not involved. Also reinforcing the concerns around secrecy, if you like, of the whole deal. Do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, I think I was not actually surprised, given the fact that if you can remember the fiasco around the budget and the passing and the budget passings processes in the National Assembly were a matter of national importance, as the budget was kind of clandestinely processed through some subways, and then it was passed, and then some members, very influential members and experienced members of the National Assembly, were complaining that they were not privy to some of the details that need to be placed on the table. I think for me, I would not be surprised. Given the kind of things that we see evolving out of the two chambers that are supposed to protect our interests as Nigerians and as voters. But the way and manner members of the National Assembly have actually suggested that the House of Representatives is not even aware, I think puts across the fact that there are some sinister kind of scheme, and that is done to actually get the whole thing passed in the way and manner clandestine legislations are passed through our national assemblies. I believe the clandestine nature of the process that we have seen actually underscore and supports the fact that Nigerians have every reason to suspect there are some foul play in the content and the context of the adoption of the deal. And of course, typically most deals in that nature comes with such frivolous conditions that make you turn to an animal before you take them.
That's right. Okay, let's look at the next one, because we have the subject matter we're going to discuss. This is just by the way. The creation of livestock ministry, livestock development ministry. It came from the composition, if you like, or the inauguration of a livestock committee established some time ago to address the farmer herders conflict. Do you think this will solve the problem? Because we're looking at it as a very complex situation. It's not just about a ministry. It's something that requires a holistic approach and all of that. Do you think it will solve any problem?
Well, typical of Nigerian politicians, Nigerian leaders, I think a tradition had been established and embedded in in the center of leadership in this country, that Nigerian problems are always solved by committees, and then by setting up agencies or ministerial departments or extra ministerial departments, or even ministries. That's a culture that has been there and has been embedded, and of course forgetting the simple fact that there is the Ministry of Agriculture, and which ought to have all of this. It has a lot of departments that are actually responsible for implementing existing government policies that will actually drive the sector, the subsector,
the livestock
subsector of the agri sector, to drive it and may move it to a point where it will serve the Nigerian national economic and strategic interest. But unfortunately, the departments are there, the public servants are there, and the ministers are appointed on day-by-day basis. And by the time you look backwards and then evaluate how much impact have we seen and how much growth have we generated, how much value have we created that impacts on the Nigerian economy, you now go back and find that in the final analysis, it is only those workers in the industry that earn their salaries, and it is only those other salient institutions around the system that makes like a little income here and there. But mind you, despite the fact that the livestock development sector is one of the most abandoned sector in the Nigerian economy.
Yeah, I'm actually coming to that, looking at the economy of it. Because beyond just, the farmers' hardest conflict,
yeah,
which seems to be the focal
point now.
The livestock sector
subsector
or industry itself, it should be, should be of interest to authorities, because this is what sustains other economies.
Definitely.
Because it has all the value chain, talking about dairy production and all of that.
Definitely.
So do you think limiting it to addressing farmers' hardest conflict will serve the purpose?
Yeah, I think that will probably amount to administering placebos or paracetamol, kind of, treating the symptom as against the fundamental things that needs to be done in the system. And let me give you dimension the subsector for us to see the kind of value it portends. Now, I said, despite the fact that the livestock subsector of the agri sector, despite its dismal performance, I can bet you Nigeria does not import meat and meat products, except a very insignificant percentage.
Actually,
That's one. Two, the last statistics that I came across is suggesting that Nigeria has about 147 million herds of cattle and ruminants, kind of almost more than half the size of Nigerian population. Now, when you take a look at the contribution of this massive size, in fact, the value of that kind of a subsector, you're talking of about 8-9 trillion naira, kind of the value of the stock that you may have, as we're talking.
Even with the deficiencies.
Even with the deficiencies.
It
is serving the Nigerian economy, and we're only importing a bit of dairy products, highly processed products in Nigeria. And so the sector had actually performed, I said, countlessly more than any other sector in Nigeria, despite the fact that it is the most neglected sector. Now, of course, the farmer harder crisis was a thing that evolved out of the primary effects of climate change, which we have begun to see.
That's also a linkage with our topic, perhaps.
With our topic. Exactly.
Yes.
So I want to say the size of this industry can ordinarily, if fully exploited, can probably contribute 25-30% of the Nigeria's GDP. But unfortunately, it is still operating rudimentally, as in the days of the Abrahamic days, when herdsmen were pursuing, the industry is operating. Exactly, the industry is operating in the prehistoric age. Because we have not significantly seen those things that would evolve around it.
So if there is anything that the ministry perhaps need to address, is perhaps modernizing
the industry.
Exactly.
Bringing out
harnessing its potential.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even though there are also concerns around duplication of functions, and then the cost of governance, because on one hand the government is talking about merging ministries, reducing and all of that,
and at the same time, yes, exactly.
So but in spite of all of that, if the ministry will be able to address some of these concerns, that is, two things can be achieved. The peace and security, can be achieved. That is on the one hand, and then economic value of the industry would also be attained.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Let's launch. Go straight into.
Let me. There's one small salient point I want to put across.
Okay.
Now, people will talk about this industry and this industry and this industry, and come to think about it, I said, despite the fact that this industry, the the livestock industry.
Mm.
Don't forget, a liter of milk, it's more valued, it's more in value, even at the global level, than a liter of petrol. And don't forget also that the Swiss company called Nestle, I just want to a Swiss company called Nestle that does business, it's a Swiss company that does business in the dairy industry, make more sales than the entire Nigerian oil and gas industry on an annual basis.
So we're neglecting a cash cow here.
Now, I mean, the cows are there. It's just to get the milk and then you make money because now countries like Saudi Arabia, that is desert entirely, is now exporting over $5 billion worth of dairy products and cattle, meat products, $5 billion US.
So you can imagine what that can do in terms of...
And the population of herds and ruminants that they have is less than 50 million. While we have 140 million of such in Nigeria. Niger is doing better, Burkina Faso is doing better, Mali is even doing better than us in terms of the contribution of this subsector to the growth of the economy. I think it's very
Is it a failure of policy or is it that we don't, I mean, trivializing the issues? Because some see the entire problem around the livestock production, as some sort of, giving it some sort of ethnic,
Naturally.
Yes.
Naturally.
So is that the reason why we're not looking at the economic value of it? Or is it about the policies inconsistency?
Yeah, I think, the fact that there is no serious, the fact that the industry is not subsidized, and the fact that the industry has no support, has not gotten any support from the government, the fact that it is operating in the pre-Abrahamic age, the industry is still supplying what we basically know our food needs, beef, meats and what have you, and the basic needs for milk and what have you. Now, the problem, I said, is not the policy. Okay, but you don't need a policy for an industry like this to operate at this scale, because the policy would not have actually.
Yeah, even though some say you need an enabling environment.
Yeah, like I said, it is operating in the pre-Abrahamic kind of setup. What I'm saying is that the failure is that of governance, and the people vested with the responsibility of implementing the policies. It is not the policy, it is not the law, it is not the environment.
Implementation.
It is about implementation.
All right. Okay. Let's continue because they are interwoven. Anyway.
Yes, it's natural.
We'll be talking about it also in the course of this conversation. Agriculture, a very vital sector in our economy. In fact, contributes to, at some point, even
60% plus.
Yes.
It was contributing 80, 90, naturally.
Yes, and then a second largest employer of labor after government.
No. Agriculture as an industry is the biggest employer.
Biggest, not even second.
The biggest employer.
So we can imagine all of this. But here we are, battling with hunger crisis. Now everyone is running helter-skelter. The government is churning out intervention policies, stopgap measures, importation. Is that the way to go?
Of course, like I said in the concluding part of our other part of the conversation,
right?
We always say that the failure it is not the policy, and it is not the programs. It is not. What is wrong with the whole thing is the human beings involved in the implementation.
Human factor, right?
Exactly. And when you're talking of the implementation chain, it starts from the initiator, and then the administrator, and then the implementer, and everybody in the entire value chain up and down. Now, you would recall just a few months ago, the president inaugurated apart from the economic team, declaring a state of emergency food security. And I think declaring a state of emergency in food security entails that everybody in government should declare his own various subset of emergency when it comes to matters that has to do with the food security. Now, Nigeria's profile as far as food security is concerned still remain very bleak and very bad. the World Bank and most of the international agencies that do something with food and food security are suggesting that between 25 to 30 million Nigerians are consistently facing threats of, severe food security.
The projection is that by 2025, we're talking about 82 million.
82 million, that's a bleak figure for us to look at. Now, when you're talking of 82 million people, apart from Nigeria, there is no other country in Africa that has a population of 82 million people. And that suggests the theater in Nigeria, as far as food security is concerned, is going to represent the biggest theater of crisis if things have not been done appropriately. Now, this issue of food security is, if you look backwards 10 years ago, there were things that were in the conversations all over the place, but it has not come to our face, and the Nigerians have seen. And so many factors, myriad of factors came in to actually bring forth to us this issue of crystallization of the issue of food security in Nigeria.
Right.
And I cannot see creating some stopgap measures becoming the most fundamental thing that needs to be done. Nigeria has 84 million hectares of land, cultivable land. That's right. Only 34 is being used. And out of even the 34, the crisis up here and there has shrunk down to probably, we should be talking of 20 or 20 something. Now, like I suggested, the biggest existential threat to Nigeria is this climate change thing, because that is what is exacerbating every security crisis you see. The farmers and herders, if you look deeply, it's about struggle for resources, limited resources, which is exacerbated by the changing global weather and climate systems. And so it means to say stopgap measures like putting fiscal incentives for importation of food products, or creating programs, that will be launched in Abuja, and after the launch, you will never hear anything about that, and that will not solve the problem. We need to go back to the very fundamental things that we need to do to make sure food is sufficiently produced, distributed, and then fairly priced for Nigerians to consume.
Okay, fundamental issues there. We will be looking at the pricing, because looking at the inflation today, you're talking about 40.66% of food inflation in the country and all of that. But then, talking about stopgap measure and why perhaps government has to go in there. A hungry man is an angry man.
He's an angry man.
So hunger doesn't wait for all these long-term measures.
Naturally.
Perhaps that's the reason why government is thinking importation.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, importation also has its own effect. Because we are talking about adding burden, food import burden. About 2019, Nigeria was doing 3.3 trillion, 4 times the contribution of the entire sector to the economy. And now we're talking about importing 250,000 metric tons of rice, another 250,000 metric tons of wheat. If you look at the value and the quantum of money that is going to be expended, and here we are talking about, getting value for our naira. How do we reconcile all of these issues?
It is this seeming continuous conflicting policies of government, policies and stance of government that actually have continued to exacerbate the crisis. Under an emergency situation, the law of nature dictates that you take everything that comes. Of course, providing as much as the stopgap will be able to take care of the
and look at the time frame, you're talking about 5 months.
5 months. Taking care of the short-term and looming crisis, I think it's very important to do that. But my problem is how is it going to be done? How is the government going to do that? Ordinary fiscal incentives around reducing or actually removing import duties or what have you for importers
Yes.
will not solve the problem, because these importers would have to source for finance to do the import. And this finance is FX. And with the way and manner the US dollar, with what the US dollar has gone through and the Nigerian naira had gone
currency
through,
devaluation,
you will know that there is no way this policy will succeed as long as the people or the businesses that are going to import these products are going to use the USD to do the import. Because it will technically amount to importing another inflation, because no matter how cheap the food is, let's say in Ukraine, in Russia, in China, Brazil, and what have you,
Nigeria.
by the time it hits the seaports, our seaports, and everybody has put in his kind of levies
yeah.
and what have you, you will see that the food will still be expensive. Unfortunately, too, when you now take the foods from Lagos or from Port Harcourt or Calabar into the hinterlands, the cost of diesel, by the time you factor everything, the entire effect of that process will yield to very minimal and insignificant value.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
what that means perhaps is either the government takes the differentials, or the cost remain, or even go higher. Because looking at the the issue you raised.
Exactly.
So that perhaps if I get your position, the important thing to do is not just to import, but to ensure that there's an enabling ground for either both the importers and the producers of the food.
Exactly.
I mean, because if you fail to address the issue of transportation, the cost of transportation, and all of that as a result of fuel subsidy removal, whatever you do revolves around that chain.
It is true. Right. It is true. You cannot wait until you address the very fundamental things that will take like 3, 4, 5 years.
Right.
Of course, in Nigeria, you can see how laying a railway track from Lagos to Kano, rehabilitating it, is taking us over a decade. When the British actually conquered Nigeria, they did that in 7 years, in the 1800s upwards to the 19th. They did that in 7 years. They connected Lagos and Kano in 7 years. You can imagine what happened. Now it is taking our government 15 years to deploy a rail line, an efficient rail line from Lagos to Kano, or from Lagos to Port Harcourt, Lagos, kind of. Now, you cannot wait until the fundamental things that need to make the distribution and then the economy efficient for them to be done, because our politicians have not been able to do that in history. Now, in fact, the functioning of the Nigerian economy in post-60s have actually rely just because we had an efficient transportation mechanism which was bequeathed to us by the colonial administration. The subsequent other governments have not done
which were yet to even sustain.
Naturally. We have not. And so you can imagine at the state we are, what will it take to put the transport infrastructure right, and then the cost of energy right, electricity right?
CNG
exactly.
And what have
all
you,
these
CNG.
are jargons that elites will gather and talk about, and then the end.
Even though there are issues around infrastructure.
Exactly.
Okay, now looking at what needs to be prioritized, for instance, you earlier talked about the insecurity and how climate change is exacerbating all of that. Fundamentally, many believe that the food crisis we're facing today has direct linkage with the insecurity, the prevailing insecurity, especially, around the food basket, so to speak. The entire Northwest, looking at the arable crop, map is in the hands of non-state actors.
Exactly.
So food production has been very minimal, and again, even the yield.
Yield per hectare.
And all of that has reduced drastically. Here we are talking about, post-harvest loss, preparing for harvest. But food prices have gone up. So it's a complex situation, I would say. So in terms of prioritizing, what do you think need to be prioritized very quickly, to address this problem?
I think it is like I usually say, Nigerians are not deficient of policies, kind of laws and rules,
ideas and
whatever. We are never deficient of that. What we are deficient of is those human beings that will be charged with the responsibility of implementing. Now, for the generation of Nigerians that we are currently alive and kicking in Nigeria, every Nigerian will confess to you that he has never faced this kind of a crisis. I mean, food shortages and food security crisis in Nigeria. That's a fact. It is not because Nigeria cannot produce what it takes, what it needs. Let me be frank with you. The most naturally endowed country in this continent is Nigeria. If you look at its geography and demography, you know, the confluence, River Niger and Benue, converging at the center, and dissipating down into the Atlantic too. The billions and billions of gallons of water that annually spreads on Nigeria and dissipates into the Atlantic Ocean tells you.
Even though there is no plans to preserve.
You can imagine the preservation of water.
It has become.
So the idea is, God that created Nigeria did not want Nigeria to be poor. It is Nigerians.
It is blessed in all ramifications.
It is blessed in every.
Water,
there is no country in Africa.
Solid minerals.
Exactly. Egypt.
And all of that.
Egypt, which is the nearest competitor in whatever index you take, lives on the bounties of the Suez Canal and the Nile River. These are the only things. But apart from that, the entire Egyptian landscape is desert. There is nothing like semi-arid that you can plant anything in Nigeria and it will grow. And despite this blessing from God, we have not been blessed with probably as those set of people at the leadership level that could harness all these things and make Nigeria the great nation that God intended. Now, that we have not seen.
Yeah, looking at the resources, you know, just like you said, the population, I mean, some are looking at the need for government to, because there is need for an accelerated plan to address this problem. And many believe that there is need to engage smallholder farmers. But engaging the smallholder farmers requires also access to credit, access to farm implements, access to fertilizers. But looking at what the government is doing, you will see it, you know, demonstrating that will to take on these challenges, deficit in terms of mechanization, deficit in terms of financing, deficit in terms of, you know,
availability of
technology and all of that.
Look, what I have not seen is, I have not seen our political leaders, and in this case, both at the center and at the state levels, doing the right set of things, a combination of things that needs to be done. For example, for you to have bumper harvests, you need to have good seeds, you need to have fertilizer. All the most important factors have been already provided by God. God has given you the land and the rains are coming consistently. Now, it's those basic things that you put as inputs into the agricultural process that has not been harnessed, organized, harnessed and produced and brought to the doorstep of a farmer to afford to buy easily and plant. Those things are those elements that are to be handled by human beings. And of course, unfortunately, the human beings have not handled it well. That's why, as I'm speaking with you, Nigeria still imports fertilizer. If not by the grace of God, that some few
years ago, some sort of
that some investors have taken a very serious bull, you know, to create some small scale and medium scale and large scale fertilizer processing plants. And we would not have one. And let me even make it, you know what it takes to produce fertilizer? We have everything in Nigeria. Everything
the raw material
that is needed to produce fertilizer is available in Nigeria. Yet we're importing fertilizer, and the politics of fertilizer kind of a thing that comes annually, especially at the state governments and at the federal government level, has still remained consistent, and it's an issue. Farm inputs, access to finance. I always say, because I'm a political economist in one sense, that access to finance should be considered as human right. Because finance principally is the aggregation of everybody's financial resources put together, for the government and individuals. But because of the nature and the structure of the financing, the financial system we have, those that have access to the finance,
the distribution
of the wealth is so skewed to those
in favor of the ruling elites,
in favor of the ruling economic elites and the government. Now, access to finance should be an issue that can be addressed by the government and by the state governments. I cannot see why do we have to have a central kind of a scheme of arrangement that will be providing access to finance to farmers. State governments can equally create institutions. Cooperative financing is one very, very functional thing that has worked in so many countries in Latin America and China that we need to work on.
Okay, now that the federal government is talking partnership with the states, perhaps this is where they have to come in, because the government is looking at the need, or rather is engaging the states, subnational governments, especially in the area of securing the environment, because that's what is fundamental. You cannot talk about agricultural production without that security
that is needed.
That's one. And then they're talking about also financing, access to credit and so on. And even the fertilizer distribution. Now the government is, reaching out to the farmers through the state governments. But there has been concerns, just like you raised earlier, about the politicization in most cases of this whole thing.
Exactly.
You find out that the right people that need to access some of these interventions are not getting it.
Of course.
It ends up in the hands of political farmers or so on. So how do we address this?
I saw on the media that one former minister who is, a federal high court judge, a federal high court in Lagos, has actually ordered that one ex-minister that was in charge of humanitarian affairs should account for about 700 billion that was disbursed to Nigerians in the name of social kind of interventions and what have you. And this is what happened even in the fertilizer distribution thing. Now, the farmers operating at the lowest ebb in the entire value chain are the worst hit in all cases. Unfortunately, if you break the demographics of Nigerian Nigerian farmers, you will see that we have less than 3% large-scale farmers in Nigeria. People you can categorize as large-scale farmers. Now, there's 78% of Nigerian population that are all small-scale farmers, translating to over 120 million people, have all been kind of disenfranchised in terms of access to finance and those basic things that needs to be available for them to access and actually use in the production of agriculture and food. Now, unfortunately, the quantum, you can imagine, we're talking of about 120 million people now disenfranchised. Not that. Ways and means where these resources can be harnessed and presented and managed. I know that they're there. Our governors are not serious when it comes to matters like this because the federal government takes all the bashings.
And that's what it's trying to change.
Exactly. They take all the bashings. Exactly. But I want to say, if the federal government can be smart enough, there are ways the federal government can make states accountable.
How can that happen? Because in most cases they are looking at the fact that these are two tiers of government who have separate responsibilities and jurisdictions.
Exactly. Let me say, how you can make the state government accountable will be not an institutional way. It should be in a political way, for example. If the federal government will take a program to a state and make the program successful, it will make the state government sits well and do the rightful things because people are seeing. Now, one of the biggest problems is that we don't know the right set of things, talk less of even expecting them. Now, the federal government has sufficient resources and has sufficient structure to actually reach every square inch, not every square inch, every square hectare of farmland in Nigeria. It has, because...
But what happens to the laws? Because, land administration...
Agriculture is in the exclusive list as is in the concurrent legislative. Everybody has a role to play. Yeah. Now, but because the states have not seen seriousness on the side of the federal government, they too are not serious. Because every effort, so if you gather and aggregate every energy, financial, economic, political, and what have you, that Nigerian state is putting in agriculture, and then you put it vis-a-vis the output, you will see that there's something fundamentally wrong.
Right.
That's the issue of efficiency in the intervention.
Right. Okay. We're looking at the way out. We have a crisis at hand. Hunger crisis that has to be managed and managed effectively. Yeah. Again, it's also exacerbated by the growing number in terms of population. Population is outpacing, production. Yeah. And so, so talking about upscaling production, there are people who felt that there is need now that the rains are receding. Government need to focus on irrigation, sustainable irrigation intervention.
Exactly.
And all of that. That could perhaps bridge the gap.
Exactly.
But do you see, how do you think this can be realized, looking at the challenge?
Let me give you some statistics around irrigation that you can now be able to dimension the extent of the crisis. Nigeria has about, that is the information received from the government, has about 3 million hectares of irrigable land. That's the endowment by nature, 3 million. If I tell you, despite the 7 or 8 or 9 river basin development
12,
authorities, 12, that we have, all financed by budget, to make sure that the acreage under their cover are cultivated and produced and what have you.
Sustainable.
I am telling you that up till this time around, the total number of acreage managed by all the river basin developments put together is less than 1 million. Now, you can imagine, this is the potential. And this is what we're all doing. Everybody, every financial resources put together. Secondly, the technology, the irrigation technology deployed in those days does not, at this time, looks efficient in terms of water utilization, because they are open drainage kind of irrigation system when we're talking of hydroponics this time around. Now, meaning in essence, the quantity of natural water that we have to irrigate this farming, the current water that we have, if technology is adopted,
applied,
can triple the quality and quantity of output. These are efficiency issues.
Yeah, and all this revolves around financing.
Around financing.
Yeah, but we're beginning to see, lastly, of course, rounding up, deploying the resources is another challenge. Trillions of naira are being expended on things that some felt shouldn't be, because they're not emergencies anyway.
Exactly.
Infrastructure is needed, but then rules taking trillions of naira, having also spending money on, social intervention running to trillions of naira when you have a critical emergency in food security. What would you advise the government in terms of channel the funds appropriately?
You can see exactly from the issue we have started our conversation around. The accelerated stabilization and advancement program was budgeted 2 trillion naira. Now, let me tell you, government is like a magician. Money is a certificate of productivity. Government produces it. And if they have projects that they have interest, they will actually create the money even if it does not exist. And let me tell you, this 2 trillion that has been provided for this program is extra budget. I don't know where it's going to be sourced.
That's right.
And that tells you naturally that if government wants to put agric and irrigation infrastructure, if they consider it as an emergency thing, they would do it. They will find the finances.
All right. Thank you very much, Rabiu Tukur Hassan, a economic policy analyst, for your informed perspective.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate your coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
And viewers, that's a wrap on today's edition of Daily Politics. Be sure to join Daily Politics Live, airing every weekday, and also a special package on Friday, during which we open our telephone lines for you to comment on national issues. Once again, I am Rabiu Tukur. Many thanks for investing your time with us.